should say, Charlotte, although you're recording this, this will only go up on the website, assuming I don't make an utter bollocks of it. So, you know, there is that caveat as well. Well, thank you for the introduction, and perhaps we should just make it clear this is obviously farming focused, and given the time constraints, it's specifically related to family farm. So the first question to ask is, what do you want to leave behind? I once asked an impoverished science friend of mine this question, and he said, oh, just my protons and neutrons will do. So I said, well, what about all those the papers you've published? And he said, well, of course, I would like them to be used by research in the future. I said, what about your children? He said, well, I hope they will carry forward the values that their mother and I have instilled in them. And this went on, and it was quite instructive in that it's, even if you don't have a lot to hand on, it is far more than just the assets we pass on. So if the first question is, what do you want to leave behind? The second question has got to be, what have you done about it? And if you haven't done very much, you're not alone. In fact, you're in quite some great company. And my favorite example from history is that of the Prophet Muhammad, who, father of a nation, and great by all metrics of judgment, except, of course, not with succession. When he died, he failed to leave a successor, and the family assumed that the bloodline would carry the caliph. And his friends, however, assumed that as they had shaped early Islam, they would be the rightful heirs. So what? Well, so 1600 years later, those divisions are as deep and as murderous as they ever were. The followers of the family are the Shia Muslims, and the followers of his friends are the Sunni Muslims. Now, I'm not suggesting that our lack of forethought will result in something so quite globally significant. But if I use the words like heartbreak, bad blood, ruin, I think we can all identify with those. Of course, not in our own situations, but we all know people who have been in that situation. By the way, it's always easier to fix somebody else's family. In the flyer for this webinar, I mentioned Jim. And Jim was a good case in point, or I should say Jim's father was a good case in point. For the 4 weeks after Jim's father's death, Jim and I went through all of the business to find nothing at all. He had left nothing, and the consequences were as expected. The business failed, the 4 employees lost their jobs, the family farm was sold, and the family fell out. And more sadly, I think, was the Jim's father, who had done some good things in life, and not remembered for those, but they're remembered for the fact that he left everyone in a muddle. You know, is that what we want to leave behind? Now, I've consulted quite widely for this webinar because I know a lot of you guys know a lot of Nuffields who have wide experiences, and you'd be surprised just how rare good transition is. Most of them look like plot lines for Columbo movies. It's extraordinary, the amount of duplicity and spitefulness. And anyway, so over the next 15-20 minutes, I just want to sketch out my approach to working with family farms in this area. And the Q&A will be helpful for me. And I say this because there actually are no experts in this, because as soon as you get to dealing with people, it all gets a bit fuzzy. And not only does the advisor not know what the client's thinking, in all my experience, I don't think the client actually knows what they're thinking, and it takes time. So if you have some experience on this, that you certainly have a piece of a jigsaw, and it's a piece of the jigsaw that I might not have. So I'm always happy to hear your stories and stuff. Right, let's just put up a few slides. Have they come out, Charlotte? Are we online with those? Yeah, okay. So hang on. For some reason we have. Okay. Sorry about that. Technology. I did say to Charlotte, I said my one panic thing about this is will all of this, as I'm hosting the share screen as well. Okay, so straight into reasons for delaying a succession. And these are genuine quotes from various people over the years as to just exactly why they haven't bothered pursuing it. And I understand why. People don't want to make the wrong decision. It's possibly one of the most important decisions that we can ever make. And so, small steps. I know it's important, but it's never that urgent. Well, that's the old Eisenhower approach to time management that Stephen Covey champions. The things that we should do are the important but not urgent. I've written a will. They'll find out then. Well, as we're going to see, a will is not the same thing at all as succession. It's emotional can of worms. Yeah, this is a quote from a farmer. I'd just rather wrestle a lion. And I always think of Fagin in Oliver Twist. I'm reviewing the situation. Who wants to face that emotional family fallout? So you just put it off. Spend money. Well, what's it going to cost if you don't do something? My partners always veto any attempt to start the process. Well, why do they do that? I think it's important to just get to the bottom of it. Don't like my children's spouse. I hear this quite a lot, actually, quietly. So I'll just wait and see how it lasts. And as we know, is it 45% of all relationships end in divorce? However, there is a way around this, of course. I'm sure many of you have already done this, is that there is a separation between business and assets. And often, if most farming businesses I come across don't really have a lot of capital, and so things can be, maybe that makes it slightly easier. So nobody can do it as well as me. Well, narcissist, I can't see how to start to do this. Yeah, how do we do it? Get some advice. It's just always about small steps. And who am I if I'm not controlling the business? Now, if you are controlling the business and you've been doing it for quite a few years, this will probably be fulfilling your needs at quite a high level. And it's difficult, therefore, just to give it up. And therefore, you need to find something else that meets your needs at that high level. And I don't want anybody else looking at my affairs. Now, maybe there are some privacy issues here. It's amazing after you're not here, there are no private issues at all. But usually, I don't want anybody looking at my affairs is just kind of code for, I don't want people to know what a complete bollocks I've made of things. So, so normally I do the survivor's guide at the end, but I thought I'm going to do it right now because a lot of people, individuals, when I talk to farming family businesses, never as a group, but certainly as individuals, they talk to me about the rucksack of issues they carry with them from either a succession plan or just decisions that have been made. We can spend hours on this. So I thought I'd start off with my top 3 tips to put that bag down, to help you put that bag down. So number 1, it was never personal. If the donor or deceased actually meant it personally, then frankly, their punishment is to be posthumously ever thought of as in a negative light. However, if you choose to take the matter personally, then I'm afraid you have issues. Just like in the same way that when we have a road rage, it's important to remember the other driver didn't get out of bed specifically to victimize you. You're not that significant. You've just chosen to carry that incident with you for whatever reason. Okay, this is quite a big one. Sibling rivalry. It's much older than man. In fact, it's probably about at least 1/3 of a billion years old. We share that part of the brain with crustaceans. And the hierarchy that gives us that feeling of worth is based on our near environment. And there's no nearer reference or nearer environment than our siblings. And the Bible makes loads of references on this point. There's Joseph, there's the prodigal son, Jacob and Esau. And in fact, the first human story of the Bible is Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel out of what? Jealousy, resentment. And he's punished by God for he has to live out his entire natural life. Now, that doesn't sound like a punishment. It is when you consider that the point of that is every day they spend feeling guilty for that past sin. And I think the parable here is the fact that there is no, in a sibling fight, there is always a lose-lose. Okay, the victim and the perpetrator both suffer. And not just that, but he had to live out his life in the land of Nod, or Lincolnshire, as we used to say in Norfolk. So, let it go. The number of people I've worked with, eventually they've struggled with family and they've gone and then made it on their own and found their own way in life. Boy, they are so much happier. They feel a great sense of their own achievements and fulfillment. And it's lovely to see them flying. And they realize, they look back and they were always trying to please, well, if not parents, grandparents, or the culture of the family. And you just have to live your own life and let it go. So, given this is all quite problematic, you've got to think, who actually are you doing this all for? Well, of course, you're doing it for your kith and kin and the descendants of those, your staff and your dependents. I suppose you'd call these stakeholders, your customers, a community. I'm guessing for many of you multi-generational people, you're known in the local area, hopefully for your good works. Some of you will have strong environmental credentials. And then there is self-aggrandizement. You've started this business and you're going to keep your name in lights forever. And you're going to make sure your children are tied in to do that. Well, you can't control things beyond the grave. You need to let those ideas go. But let's assume that you are going to head towards, you are going to do this. Let's just quickly remind ourselves of the advantages and the disadvantages of just why we want, what is the thing of family businesses. Great commitment that you don't often see with other businesses. Obviously, people understand the job from young age. You never hear that's not in my job description. The really great thing from an accountant point of view is that I see investments that are for grandchildren. Now, in accountancy, you'd never see that longer than a 5-year payback, 3 preferably. And obviously, you've got decreased costs because you can get family to work. And we'll come across in the notion of equity sweat in the future in a while. But if they've got to take a pay cut, they will do that usually. Disadvantages, obviously, there's a lack of interest. Those people may never want to come into this, but well, couldn't be bothered to do anything else. Family conflicts, it just seems to escalate when you're caught inside the proximity of a workplace. You can have, with unstructured governance, and we'll come on to a family constitution, you can find that there are small elements of the business that can sink the whole. And it's not surprising that second generation survival of a family business is 30%. In fact, that drops to 10% with third generation survival. I think which makes farming something people can generally be proud of, because I know many third and fourth and even a 5th generation farm. So if we're only getting to 10% on first, it probably shows just how well farming is doing. Nepotism is always really bad. And so you need to make sure that you're not just giving. In fact, I know so many examples where an entire enterprise has been created just to save face. They've been far better off putting said child in Barbados and giving them $50,000 a year for life than the negative impact on the business. And of course, succession planning, which is really the focus of this. Many family businesses just don't get into that. So if I can persuade you to do nothing other today, if you take nothing from this, can I persuade you to do a drop-dead plan? I've got one of these because as I get older and my adventures get more and more stupid, my wife is sure that one day she will get the phone call, and I'm sure she will too. So a drop-dead plan is write on an envelope, if I've dropped dead, this may help you. The lasting power of attorney only cost 80 quid. Do them on, there's a DIY. The government website is so straightforward and easy. There's no excuse not to do a lasting power of attorney. You can obviously contact all the contact details of the important people. You should have life insurance. Hopefully you've got all those numbers, passports, approximate list of assets, where they are, anybody particularly that needs to know about or who's involved in that. Letter to loved ones. Yeah, I've got to update mine. Last time I did mine, my kids were teenagers. Yeah, perhaps not the same language now, Matt. This is a really important one because I've done this so many times now with even collections of classic tractors. Your children probably do not want them, and they will be stuck in that shed forever because the children will feel guilty about disposing of them. You can't just settle your emotional likes and wants on what's going to come after you. If apart from anything else, I've seen some fantastic ancient library just go in the skip. So if you want anything to go up to your particular your favorite chattels, make sure you do something about it. Passwords for your phones and tablets and online accounts, assuming that of course you want people actually looking who you've been calling, those chat lines you've been calling. I just put this in for my funeral requirements because my dear old mum, and excuse me if I get a bit teary, I always talk about that. She actually arranged her own catering. Bless her. Never forget her for that. So, and the last one I've just put in there, I mean, essentially, this list is endless, but I'm assuming that everybody's done a will. For goodness sake, if you haven't, this is, although 50% of all parents haven't done a will. I just want to say why tax planning is synonymous with succession planning, because the two are, they're not separate, but it's only tax planning is such a small part of it. It's often the tail wagging the dog. And obviously, I don't know if you know the old Maslow quote, somebody's good with a hammer will see the whole world as a nail. Well, if you ask an accountant, you'll get a tax solution. So the great thing about that, it's discrete, so it has boundaries, and there's never any, you don't have to get the tissues out for a sob story when you're just doing tax planning. It's chargeable, so the accountants will obviously do that. It's an easy metric. I did some work last year, 7.2 million assets. I think that was a probate. After APR and BPR, we got it down to 20 grand in like results. And it's defendable. So those actions are defendable in law because we follow the guidelines, irrespective of the family consequences. And this is always my problem with tax planning. If that becomes the major element of succession planning, then there are so many other family consequences that could easily have been overlooked, and assets not underutilized because people kept saying they were told by an accountant at some stage, well, I wouldn't do that because it's bad for inheritance tax. You know why? Because the accountant says so. It's not. Accountants don't see the whole picture. So we're starting to get on to some good stuff now, and I try and do these 6 points with people, but the bottom is good enough. A family constitution is a written statement that records family heritage, culture, hopes, aspirations, and future success, and plans how to achieve that success. The document enables smooth running of family affairs, interest by containing a number of provisions for different events. So that really says it all, and mine isn't as good as that, except point number 3 I just want to mention is the map of the business, which is often people think it's just the organogram of the structure, but it's I think it's important to the bit at the business plan, which is really the now, where, how. So I'm guessing a few of you have done these. I'm happy to give you my notes on this, but the now is the resource audit, where you are now. So it's your 5 M's, your Porter's 5 forces, your pest analysis, maybe an ANSOF. Your where are your talents, where are your passions, and the how is just either getting resources or developing resources to get from stage 1 to stage 2. So that's the business plan, and the succession plan sits alongside that. And just to reiterate, it doesn't end. Succession doesn't start when somebody drops dead. Hopefully you're alive for a long time to see that business grow and flourish alongside that new leadership. So the process is start early. It's a long time, and the children need to be brought in as early as possible. You could be talking about this from when they're a teenager, from an early teenager. This is what we have in mind, but if you don't want to do this, that's fine, we'll do something else. They need to be continually aware that they're involved in this. but everybody who's affected needs to be it needs to be discussed with. But don't make promises, because one of the problems about things change. People get divorced, people die. There are some promises you just can't keep. Be honest. It is an ongoing process. It just is an ongoing process. It's an iterative thing. So do take some advice from a tax accountant, but make sure. I think probably my main advice is, if you know of somebody who does this particularly well. I think most people on this webinar are from Nuffield. You know, Nuffield is in quite a good way now, because it's not coincidental that one of the people advising on that 10 years or so ago has just got an exceptional family succession plan in place themselves. And so there are these wonderful exemplars. So go and find out, what did you do? How did you get it so well? Find out the talents. If people have parallel skills, like say they're really good builders and they want to be, maybe a family farming business could work, or start off another business with a family. But obviously, if those skill sets are, say, orchestra, well, perhaps there's never going to be a mix there. So you need to find somewhere else, another way of either remunerating them or just leaving them something in the will. Learn to let go. I think I may have mentioned this, but you know, things will meet your needs. You need just to find ways of meeting your needs. It's just an ongoing process, so just stay flexible. It's always it's continually emerging. Now, I have respect for traditions, I really do, but I've just come across too many instances where they become sacred cows and people are scared to do, they'd rather see something fail to pick up the pieces than actually try and change things. So don't be afraid to consider that blank sheet. The other part of the process, of course, is family meetings. I'm sure you all do them, and there's really no point to just go over these things. But it'll be there on the screen. It's just, you know, your standard family. But do them, you know, at least annually. They often work in with financial or management accounts, so the chair it would be helpful if the chair had some understanding of those figures. And it's always helpful if the current leader is open to discuss about their missteps. Too often I've sat in meetings where the leader is always right about everything. It's never going to end well. In fact, when you always end up with the shuttle, that's how we ended up with the shuttle disaster. And so finally, some of our final thoughts. The idea of custodianship, you know, so when you're valuing a business for succession, you know, what's the value of an asset that can't be sold? So if I said, here's I'm going to hand on this piece of jewelry that Bonhams have valued at £2 million. And now I'm handing it to you, but you can never sell it. What's the value of that if it can only be handed down? So the business can be separated from the assets. So if you want to take in succession planning, people can be brought on early as equity partners or as partners in a business that essentially has no value. It's if you want some comfort, but they can become involved early on in the responsibility of taking decisions. You can easily incorporate small businesses within the partnership. Ensure equity sweat is accounted for. This means if you, it's quite common for somebody to be brought in on a very low wage because they're still living in the family home, let's say 10 grand a year, but you're paying a spray operator 35, 40 grand a year. Well, there's clearly value that's added to the business by your children that's not represented. So I think that needs accounting for. Yeah, so it's never too young to start devolving some responsibility and authority go together. Yeah, succession, well, replacing yourself is not succession, because hopefully your successors should be better than you. That's what you're hoping for, or you should be hoping for. And there are no examples, no experts, but there are exemplars. And you just need to find out what they did. And so I just want to share this finally. This final story is back in the 1980s. I knew a guy who inherited 3 million of assets, and back in the 1980s, that was a lot of money. And he was pretty elated with that, you know, really cock a hoop, until of course that he found out that his brother had inherited 4 million. Suddenly he was a victim. Now, he chose to focus on that victimhood. Interestingly, he didn't choose to focus on his sister, who only inherited a small family cottage. And I got to know his sister years later, and I said, didn't you feel, you know, somehow left out by this inequitable split of assets? She said, no, not at all. I was quite thankful to inherit anything. And more importantly, I know that my father loved me. And he wrote a letter explaining just that, and why he'd split the assets as he'd done. Now, I told my daughter this same story, and she said, Dad, that's a very moving story, but don't be leaving me a letter, just the cash. And on that note, I will take some questions. Charlotte?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt. That's really given me a lot of things to think about, and I think I need to go away and do a little bit of work and make sure all of my things are in order. So thank you.
That's okay.
I'm going to pause the recording now. As promised, we won't be recording